7 match wins in a row, a first WTA title, a crowd of thousands chanting her name in a country she'd never set foot in before this summer. And then, in the space of 73 minutes, all of it stopped. 4 games in the first set, 0 in the second, a bagel in front of the biggest Filipino crowd tennis has ever seen outside the Philippines. By the end of this video, you'll understand exactly what happened in that match, why the numbers were as lopsided as they were, and why the story of Alex Eala's breakout summer might actually start with this loss, not despite it. Alex Eala is 21 years old, from the Philippines, a country that has never produced a top-tier singles player on the WTA Tour. Not one. Before her, Filipino tennis had flashes of promise, but never a genuine, sustained presence at the top of the women's game. She left home as a young teenager to train at the Rafa Nadal Academy in Mallorca, thousands of miles from her family, chasing a version of tennis success nobody from her country had ever touched. For years, she was known mainly as a junior star, with no clear runway. She won the Junior US Open title back in 2020, and junior tennis is full of names like that, prodigies who dominate age group events and then quietly disappear once the tour gets faster, stronger, and far less forgiving. Eala didn't disappear, but she also didn't have an easy climb. She had to build her career largely outside the traditional pipeline, funding runs on smaller tours, grinding through qualifying draws most fans never watch, picking up ranking points one modest tournament at a time, while more heavily backed players skip straight into bigger draws. Here's what most casual fans don't know. Before this year, Eala had never won a WTA singles title, not one. Plenty of talented players go years on tour without breaking through at that level, playing solid tennis, cracking the top 100, even beating ranked opponents here and there without ever actually lifting a trophy. That gap between promising and proven is one of the hardest things to close in professional tennis, and for a long stretch it looked like Eala might be stuck on the promising side of that line. This summer, that changed, and it changed fast. It's worth understanding just how unusual that speed is. Most players who eventually win a maiden title do it gradually, a run to a final here, a heartbreaking loss there, building belief over a year or two before the breakthrough finally lands. Eala's summer compressed that entire arc into a matter of weeks, and that compression is exactly why what happened in Toronto matters so much. When success arrives that quickly, the body and the schedule don't always get the memo that they're supposed to slow down and adjust to. In the weeks before Toronto, Eala won the Washington Open, her first career WTA singles title. That alone would be the headline of most players' seasons. She didn't get to sit with it for long. She carried that momentum straight into the National Bank Open in Toronto, a WTA 1000 event, one tier below a Grand Slam and one of the most physically demanding stops on the calendar because of the depth of the draw. She opened her Toronto run by fighting past American Caddy McNally in 3 sets, a result that extended her winning streak to 7 matches in a row. That win also set up something new for her first time ever facing Belinda Bencic on tour. Bencic was building a very different kind of momentum. The 29-year-old Swiss is a 2020 Tokyo Olympic gold medalist and the 2015 Canadian Open champion, so unlike Eala, she has been here before, on this exact court at the highest possible stakes. She's also, in a broader sense, a comeback story in her own right. Bencic returned to the tour after having her first child, and rebuilding a career at the top level of women's tennis after motherhood is its own kind of difficult. Physically and logistically, that doesn't always get the credit it deserves. By the time she reached Toronto this year, she had already re-established herself deep inside the top 20, a reminder that experience and physical maturity still count for a great deal on this tour, even against a red-hot rising talent. On her way to the match with Eala, Bencic had just survived a brutal 3-set win over Taylor Townsend that lasted 3 hours and 24 minutes. It was tense enough that cameras caught her snapping at her own coaching box mid-match, telling them to man up. That's the kind of match that tends to leave a mark on a player's legs the next day, the kind of physical toll that shows up in slower recovery, heavier legs, and a step behind on the first ball. Here's what most casual fans don't know. That kind of marathon usually leaves a player depleted the day after. Tired legs, slower first steps, a serve that doesn't quite have the same snap. Bencic didn't play depleted against Eala. If anything, she played like someone who'd fancy gear in that marathon and simply carried it forward. So what actually happened on court? Let's start with what we know, because the numbers from that match are brutal and specific, and they tell a clearer story than any narrative ever could. Bencic won 64% of her first serves and converted 72% of those points, compared to Eala's 46% on her own first serve. That gap alone is enormous at this level. On return, Bencic won 54% of Eala's first serve points, against just 28% for Eala on Bencic's first serve. Total points won across the entire match, 61% to 39%. Bencic converted 6 of her 10 breakpoint chances, in what was widely described as a masterclass performance. The final score was 4-6, 0-6 in 1 hour and 13 minutes, a match that started out competitive, with breaks trading back and forth early in the first set, and then simply fell apart for Eala once the second set began. And afterward, Bencic didn't gloat. She thanked the crowd directly, saying she knew most of them were cheering for Alex, but that it was still very nice to play in front of them, and thanking them for the great crowd. That's worth noting, because Bencic was, in effect, the away player in her own match, cheered against by thousands of people in a stadium in another country, and she handled it with total composure. Eala, for her part, kept it short and honest afterward, calling it simply a tough one today. No excuses, no long explanation, just an acknowledgement that it hadn't gone her way. Now, what we don't know exactly what was said in the locker room, or what eala and her coaching team broke down on video afterward. That level of detail hasn't been made public, and we're not going to invent it for you just to make this video feel more dramatic. There's a temptation in sports content to fill in those quiet, private moments with dramatic dialogue nobody actually said, because it makes for better television. We're skipping that here. What we can do instead is lay out the real theories, tactically and physically, for why this match went the way it did, and let you decide which one carries the most weight. Theory 1 is fatigue. Eala had played a draining 3-set battle against McNally just 2 days earlier, on top of a title run the week before in Washington. Tennis at this level runs on tight recovery windows, and hers had been short all summer, tournament after tournament with barely a gap to reset physically or mentally. Winning a title doesn't just take energy in the moment, it keeps taking energy afterward. New city, new media obligations, new opponent scouting, new pressure, all stacked on top of a body that's already been asked to compete at its highest level for weeks straight without a real break. Theory 2 is the matchup itself, and this is the tactical piece worth slowing down on because it might be the most important factor of all. Eala's game is built around aggressive, early strike baseline tennis. Take the ball on the rise, dictate first, use her lefty angles to open up the court against right-handers who aren't used to that spin and that geometry. It's a pattern that has worked against nearly everyone she's faced this summer, and it's a big part of why she was unbeaten on the entire North American hardcourt swing coming into this match. Bencic neutralizes exactly that pattern, almost by design. She's one of the flattest, most compact ball strikers on tour, and she plays extremely close to the baseline, which takes away the extra half-second Eala's game depends on to set up her patterns. Where other opponents let Eala dictate, stepping back or giving her time to load up on that lefty forehand, Bencic simply refused to give her a rhythm to attack. She took the ball early herself, denying Eala the very thing her whole game plan is built around. The longer the match went, the more that geometry problem that usually works in Eala's favor started working against her instead, because Bencic was already standing where the ball needed to go before Eala had even hit it. There's also a psychological layer that sits on top of the tactics. When a player's primary weapon gets neutralized early, the temptation is almost always to push harder with that same weapon rather than adapt, to go for a bigger version of the shot that isn't working, instead of building a new plan. The stat line from that second set, 0 games, suggests exactly that kind of spiral. Not a collapse from a lack of effort, but a collapse from repeating a losing pattern under pressure, against an opponent experienced enough to keep exploiting it point after point. Theory 3 is the moment itself, and this one's harder to quantify, but it's real. Eala was playing in front of one of the largest Filipino tennis crowds ever assembled outside the Philippines, and just her first career meeting with a former Olympic champion. That's not nothing. Rising players occasionally buckle not from nerves in the traditional sense, but from the sheer physical and emotional cost of being the center of that much hope, that fast, in a country she barely knew a year ago. There's a difference between playing to win a match and playing to justify a crowd's excitement, and the second one is a far heavier thing to carry onto a tennis court. Why does this matter for her future? Because this is the exact kind of measuring stick loss that either becomes a turning point or a pattern, and the next few tournaments will tell us which one it actually was. Here's the moment that says more than the scoreline. After the loss, instead of leaving the court quickly, Eala paused to take in the ovation from the Filipino fans who'd packed the stands for her. Down a set and bageled on foreign soil, in her most lopsided loss of the year, she stopped and let that support land before walking off. That's not a stat line. That's a 21-year-old choosing not to hide from a bad night in front of the people who'd shown up for her anyway, at odd hours, in a country most of them had traveled a long way to be in. So where does this leave her? Eala had been unbeaten on the entire North American hardcourt swing until this match. 7 straight wins, a maiden title, a career best run by any measure. One rough hour against a 2-time Olympic medalist doesn't erase that, but it does draw a very clear line between where her game is right now and where it needs to go to consistently beat the very best players on tour. Read that again. It doesn't erase the summer. It just tells her exactly what the next level actually costs, in specifics, not vague inspiration. It's also worth zooming out for a second, because a single result like this tends to get flattened into a headline. Win or loss, good week or bad week, when the reality sitting underneath it is more layered than that. A 21-year-old from a country with no real tennis infrastructure at this level just beat a string of quality opponents, won her maiden title, and then ran straight into one of the best returners and flattest ball strikers on the entire tour, fresh off a 3-hour battle of her own, in the same city, on the same surface, within the same week. That's not a small ask for anyone, let alone a player still building the physical and tactical depth to survive that kind of stretch without cracks showing somewhere. Stay with me for a second, because this is the part that actually matters going forward, more than the highlight reel or the scoreline at will. A loss like this is data, not a verdict. The serve percentages tell her where the technical work is, specifically on holding her own serve under pressure against a player who returns as aggressively as Bencic does. The rally patterns tell her where the tactical work is, specifically in finding a plan B when her usual first strike game gets taken away from her. And the crowd moment tells her something no stat sheet can, which is that the support isn't going anywhere, win or loss, bagel or breakthrough. The story isn't over. The next Grand Slam swing is coming, and with it, another chance to test exactly what she's built this summer against the very best players in the world, on an even bigger stage than Toronto. And when it does, everything changes. Do you think this loss actually helps Eala long-term, forcing her to develop the game she'll need at the very top? Or does it expose a real weakness against elite ball strikers who take time away from her early? Tell me what you think in the comments below. And if you are watching live with that Filipino crowd, in the stadium or on a stream at some ridiculous hour back home, let me know that too, because those reactions are honestly half the story of this whole summer. And if you want the next chapter in the story, the moment her next Grand Slam draw is announced, subscribe and turn on notifications, because I'll have the breakdown up within hours of that draw dropping, matchup analysis and all.